when my son shoved me in front of all the guests in my own house, yelling that the property belonged to his wife and that I needed to get out. I fell to the floor while more than 30 people watched in silence. No one lifted a finger to help me. But what Marcus didn't know was that that same night I would change his life forever. Before I continue, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell because we have new stories every day. Leave your like and tell us in the comments from which city you're watching us. My name is Andre Miller. I am 68 years old, and for my entire life I believed that a father's unconditional love was enough to build a solid family. I worked from the age of 16 in a small hardware store in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago, saving every cent I earned while my peers spent their paychecks in bars and parties. By 25, I already had my own business. By 30, I owned 3 stores, and by 40, I had built a small construction materials distribution empire that allowed me to give my family everything I never had. My son Marcus was born in 1983, and from the first day I held him in my arms, I promised he would never know the hardships I faced. I gave him the best education. I paid his entire college at the University of Illinois at Chicago, financed his master's in business administration, and when he decided to marry Crystal Walker 8 years ago, I even helped with a spectacular wedding at a 5-star hotel that cost more than $50,000. Crystal came into our lives as a charming woman, always smiling, always attentive. But my instinct, as a man who had met thousands of people over decades in business, warned me from the start that something in her gaze didn't fit. The night of October 20th, 2024 will be engraved in my memory forever. It was Crystal's 39th birthday, and she had insisted on celebrating it at the house in Naperville, which I had helped buy for Marcus 7 years earlier. I say helped because I actually financed 80% of that property valued at $600,000, but I never boasted about it because I considered it my duty as a father to secure my son's future. The house has 4 bedrooms, a large yard, and a pool that I personally supervised during construction. I arrived at 8 in the evening with an expensive gift for Crystal, a pearl necklace I had bought that very afternoon at a jeweler on Michigan Avenue for $3,200. My granddaughter Aaliyah, the daughter Marcus had from a previous relationship with his high school sweetheart, opened the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Aaliyah is 15, a smart and observant girl, and lately I had noticed she avoided family gatherings where Crystal was present. That night she wore a dark blue dress and hugged me, whispering so quietly in my ear that I didn't fully grasp it in the moment. "Grandpa, be careful, tonight." The living room was full of guests, about 30 or 35 people, including Crystal's relatives, some of Marcus's friends and neighbors. I recognized very few because in recent years, my son had gradually distanced himself from my social circles and drawn ever closer to Crystal's world. The decoration was excessive, with gold and silver balloons everywhere, a long table with catered food that must have cost several $1,000s, and loud music pounding against the walls. I felt immediately out of place, like a stranger in a house that technically was still partially mine according to documents I kept locked in my private desk. Crystal greeted me with 2 cold pecks on the cheek, took the gift without even opening it, and set it on a table next to other wrapped packages. Marcus was across the room, talking animatedly with a group of young men, all dressed in expensive clothes and flashy watches. My son wore a gray suit I had given him the previous year, now slightly tight, a sign he had gained some weight. When our eyes met briefly, he looked away immediately and continued his conversation as if I were invisible. I spent the first hour of the party practically alone, standing beside a column, watching my son laugh and toast with people he clearly considered more important than his own father. I tried twice to approach and greet him properly. Both times he maneuvered toward another group before I could reach him. I'm not a fool. I've spent decades reading people's body language in business negotiations, and I understood the message perfectly. I wasn't welcome at that celebration. Around 10 at night, when I was seriously considering leaving quietly, The incident happened that would change everything forever. Crystal had decided it was time to cut the cake, an elaborate three-tier creation decorated with sugar flowers that must have cost easily $300. All the guests gathered around the main table while someone dimmed the lights and lit the candles. I naturally moved closer. After all, I was still Aaliyah's grandfather and Marcus's father, and I considered it my right to be present at that family moment. That's when Marcus turned sharply toward me with an expression I had never seen on his face. His eyes were red, possibly from the alcohol he'd been drinking all night, and his jaw was clenched in a way that painfully reminded me of my own father when he was about to explode in one of his violent outbursts decades ago. "You have no business here," Marcus said in a voice that cut like a rusty knife. "This is my wife's house, and if you don't get out right now, I'll throw you out myself." The words hung in the air as all the guests stopped talking and turned toward us. I felt 30 pairs of eyes stabbed into my back, but I kept the calm I've cultivated over decades of dealing with difficult situations. I took a deep breath and tried to touch my son's shoulder in a conciliatory gesture, hoping to avoid a scene I knew would be humiliating for both of us. That was my mistake. The touch of my hand on his arm acted like a trigger, and Marcus reacted with a violence I never imagined possible in the boy I had raised with so much love and dedication. He shoved me with both hands in the chest, using all his strength, and my 68-year-old body couldn't withstand the impact. I fell backward, completely losing my balance, crashing first against a chair that toppled with a clatter, and then against the Italian marble floor I had helped choose when we remodeled the house 3 years earlier. The pain was immediate and stabbing in my right hip, but the absolute silence that followed hurt much more. 35 people looked at me lying on the floor as if it were an animal struck on the highway. No one moved to help me. No one spoke a single word of protest against what they had just witnessed. Crystal had a hand over her mouth in a theatrical gesture of surprise that couldn't hide the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. Aaliyah let out a strangled cry from somewhere in the room, but someone stopped her before she could reach me, and Marcus just stood there with his fists clenched at his sides, breathing hard like a bull after a charge. I stood up by myself, ignoring the pain climbing my spine. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken or begging. I took my keys from my pocket, straightened my wrinkled jacket, and walked to the front door with my back straight and my head high. No one tried to stop me. No one apologized. I only heard Crystal's voice restarting the celebration as if nothing had happened. "Well, let's keep the party going. The cake is melting." And just like that, without any ceremony, I was erased from my own son's life in front of an audience that chose to look the other way. I drove the 25 kilometers back to my Hyde Park apartment with my hands trembling on the wheel. It wasn't fear I felt, but an absolute clarity, arriving after years of refusing to see reality. The entire drive, my mind replayed signs I had deliberately ignored because fatherly love blinded me. Phone calls Marcus abruptly ended when I entered the room. Family gatherings to which I stopped being invited, with excuses increasingly transparent. Crystal's venomous comments disguised as innocent jokes about old men who don't understand the modern world. I arrived at my building after midnight. The night doorman, an older man named Daryl, who has worked there for 5 years, immediately noticed my state and asked if I needed help. I told him I was fine, but he insisted on walking me to the elevator. "Mr. Miller, you don't look well tonight," he said with genuine concern. I thanked him for his kindness, something my own blood had been incapable of showing me barely an hour earlier. My apartment is modest compared to the Naperville house I financed for Marcus. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a functional kitchen, and a small study I use as my personal office. I've lived here since my wife died 12 years ago from cancer that took her in 6 merciless months. I never wanted to move to a larger place because this space holds all my memories of her, and I've never been a man of unnecessary luxuries, despite having considerable resources accumulated over decades of honest work. I went straight to the study without even taking off my jacket. There I keep a 4-drawer metal filing cabinet with a key that contains all the important documents of my life: deeds, contracts, investments, wills. The top drawer is dedicated exclusively to everything related to Marcus. I pulled out a thick folder labeled Naperville Property and opened it on the desk under the light of the bronze lamp that belonged to my father. The papers I reviewed before dawn confirmed what my memory already knew with absolute precision. In March 2018, when Marcus and Crystal decided to buy the house, I contributed $480,000 of the $600,000 total cost. Marcus only put in $120,000 he had saved while working for years in my distribution company. However, and here is the detail my son never bothered to read carefully, the purchase contract included a specific clause my attorney Eric Patterson had drafted with absolute legal precision. I retained lifetime usufruct of the property. That means although Marcus appears as owner in the registry, I have the legal right to use and enjoy that house as long as I live. More importantly, he cannot sell, mortgage, or conduct any significant transaction with the property without my express notarized consent. Marcus signed those documents without even reading them because he trusted me blindly, and I at the time thought I was protecting his future, never imagining that legal protection would become my safeguard against his own betrayal. But that wasn't all. I reviewed other documents. Loans I guaranteed for his consulting business, totaling $250,000, the joint bank account we opened 4 years ago, where I deposited emergency funds, now adding up to $73,000, and the shares of my company I gradually transferred to him, representing 25% of the business currently valued at approximately $400,000. Everything was documented. Everything had specific clauses. Everything could be reversed under precise circumstances that included behavior seriously damaging family relations. At 4 a.m, I picked up my phone and dialed Eric Patterson. I know it's an inappropriate hour, but Eric and I have been friends for 35 years, and he had told me many times to call whenever necessary. He answered on the fourth ring with a sleepy voice that became instantly alert when he recognized mine. "Andre, what happened? Are you okay?" he asked with genuine concern. I briefly told him what had happened at the party. No dramatics, no exaggerations, just the facts. There was a long silence. Then Eric spoke with the professional precision that defines him. "Andre, that is physical assault in front of witnesses. But more important, it activates every protection clause we inserted years ago. Are you sure you want to proceed?" I confirmed without a second of doubt that yes, the time had come to act. Eric asked me to do nothing else that night, rest if possible, and meet at his office at 9 a.m. Saturday to begin executing what he called the Asset Reversion Protocol. At exactly 9 a.m. that Saturday morning, I arrived at Eric Patterson's downtown Chicago law office, located in a historic building near LaSalle Street. He was already there, wearing one of his perfectly pressed navy suits, with a folder full of documents spread neatly across his mahogany desk. "We're activating 3 legal fronts simultaneously," Eric said, flipping through the paperwork with surgical precision. "First, your lifetime usufruct gives you legal residence rights in that house whenever you wish. More importantly, it prevents any transaction, sale, mortgage, or lease, without your explicit notarized consent. Second, the loan guarantees you signed for his consulting firm include immediate cancellation clauses if family trust is breached. Third, the business shares you transferred carry a reversal clause triggered by coercion, manipulation, or physical aggression." He paused and looked at me with professional concern. "You understand what this means, Andre? If we proceed, Marcus will lose access to nearly every asset you tied him to." I nodded without hesitation. "Proceed," I said. He crossed a line that must have consequences. Eric called his paralegal and instructed her to draft certified notifications addressed to Marcus Miller, Crystal Walker, and the 3 financial institutions connected to the guarantees. Each document included highlighted clauses that now came into effect due to the assault. While Eric worked on his computer, I sat in silence. staring out at the cold Chicago skyline through the window. The metallic reflection of skyscrapers reminded me of every year I'd spent building something meant to outlast me, and how fragile it all became in a single night. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was enforcing order. A father's love doesn't disappear, but sometimes it must take the shape of discipline. By noon, the courier service had arrived to deliver the sealed envelopes. They were instructed to obtain Marcus's personal signature upon receipt. Eric explained, by law, he can't claim ignorance later. Once those are signed, the clock starts ticking. I left the office feeling heavier, not lighter. Justice can feel like grief when it's applied to your own blood. I drove to Evanston to visit my lifelong friend, Thomas Harris, a 70-year-old widower I'd met as a teenager when we both worked at a mechanic's shop. Thomas was already waiting at his door, wearing his old wool cardigan and holding 2 mugs of black coffee. I heard that tone in your voice last night, he said, guiding me inside. Something serious happened. I told him everything, from the shove to the silence that followed, to the documents now on their way to Marcus. Thomas listened without interrupting, his weathered hands wrapped around his mug. When I finished, he sighed deeply. You did what had to be done. Sometimes love means closing a door and letting the other person knock when they're ready to come back. That evening, I stayed in his guest room, lying awake as the Chicago trains hummed faintly in the distance. I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed decades of memories. Marcus as a boy building wooden airplanes with me, his first day of school, the night his mother died, and we promised each other we'd hold on. Where had that promise gone? On Monday morning, the first wave of consequences hit. At 8:30, Eric called. Andre, Wells Fargo, Chase, and First Midwest have already acknowledged receipt. Marcus will be summoned to provide alternative guarantees by noon. By 10, my phone began buzzing non-stop. 17 missed calls from Marcus. Texts appeared one after another. Dad, what is all this paperwork? I don't understand why you're doing this. Please pick up. The bank froze my lines of credit. I didn't respond. Let silence be the teacher. At 11, Eric confirmed the courier's success. Marcus signed at 10:40, Crystal at 11:20. Both are officially notified. I exhaled slowly, staring at the documents spread across my dining table. Every signature, every clause was a painful reminder of what blind trust costs. By the afternoon, Thomas returned home with takeout from Harold's Chicken Shack, one of my favorite Chicago comfort spots. We ate in silence while the local news murmured on the TV. You look calm, he said finally. Too calm. I smiled faintly. Because it's not anger anymore, Thomas. It's acceptance. He made his choice. Now I'm making mine. The following morning, my granddaughter Aaliyah texted from school. Grandpa, Mom's furious. She's screaming about lawyers and money. Dad's locked in his office. I think he's scared. Her message pierced through the calm I'd tried to build, but it also confirmed something vital. Consequences were finally landing where they belonged. By Wednesday, Eric informed me that the banks had suspended all Marcus's credit lines pending review. His company's accounts were under audit, and payment deadlines were accelerating. He'll need to come to terms with his new reality quickly, Eric said. He's about to learn what real independence costs. That night I sat by the window of Thomas's apartment, watching the city lights flicker across the river. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about profits or legacy. I was thinking about dignity, how it takes a lifetime to build, and one moment of betrayal to test. When dawn came, I knew I had done the right thing. What I didn't know yet was how far the storm would spread, or how it would reshape every bond left in my family. By Thursday morning, Marcus's world had started to crumble piece by piece. Eric called to inform me that Wells Fargo had officially withdrawn all personal guarantees and flagged his consulting company for risk reassessment. That means, Eric explained, he'll have to either liquidate part of his assets or find an investor willing to back him without your credit. Neither option will come cheap. At 10 o'clock, I received another series of calls and messages from Marcus. The first said, Dad, we need to talk. The fifth read, the banks are calling. They've frozen my business lines. And the last one came in all caps. Please answer. I'm losing everything. I didn't pick up. Consequences have to breathe before they teach. Around noon, Thomas glanced at me from across the chessboard. You're really not going to call him? He asked softly. I shook my head. Not yet. He's not ready to listen. Right now, panic's doing the job love couldn't. That afternoon, as we played in silence, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Aaliyah. Grandpa, Mom's screaming again. Dad's making phone calls nonstop. I think she's leaving. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Crystal, the woman who had slowly poisoned my son's heart, was finally showing her true nature, and in that moment, I realized something strange. Her absence might be Marcus's only path to redemption. Later that evening, Eric confirmed that all notifications had been received and legally enforced. Marcus could no longer sell, mortgage, or even alter the property deed of the Naperville house. Every penny tied to my name was now protected. For the first time in months, I felt a calm sense of control return. That night, I slept at Thomas's apartment. I woke to the smell of his coffee brewing in the kitchen. You've started a war, Andre, he said, setting a cup in front of me. Not against your son, but against the weakness you let grow in him. Don't lose your nerve now. By the weekend, Marcus had made 37 attempts to contact me. Calls, emails, messages, even a voicemail that began with sobbing and ended with anger. You've ruined my life, Dad. I don't even know who you are anymore. I replayed it once, then deleted it. He still hadn't learned the difference between being ruined and being forced to rebuild. On Saturday morning, as Thomas and I shared breakfast, my phone vibrated with another message, this time from Aaliyah again. Grandpa, I recorded some things Mom said. You need to hear them. A chill ran through me. That girl, 15 years old, was showing more courage and integrity than most adults I'd met in my entire career. I told her to come over immediately. She arrived an hour later, wearing her school hoodie and clutching an old phone. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady. I've been recording for months, she confessed. Mom always talks about you when Dad's not home. She says you won't live long, that once you're gone, everything will belong to her. She played a recording. Crystal's voice filled the room, dripping with arrogance. All we have to do is wait him out. The old man can't last much longer. Once he's gone, it's all ours. Hearing it made my stomach turn. I'd suspected her greed, but to hear it in her own words, it confirmed everything I had feared since the first day she smiled at me across a restaurant table years ago. Thomas clenched his jaw. That's enough proof to make a judge flinch, he muttered. But Aaliyah wasn't finished. She had more. Dozens of snippets where Crystal discussed ways to manipulate Marcus into taking full control of my finances, even mentioning a plan to get me declared mentally incompetent. She said she could find a doctor to sign papers, Aaliyah said quietly. I sat there stunned, then placed my hand gently over hers. You did the right thing, sweetheart. You just saved your father and me. That night I called Eric again and forwarded him the audio files. He listened silently before speaking. Andre, this changes everything. These recordings prove intent to defraud and emotional manipulation. If Marcus ever tries to claim ignorance, this evidence will destroy any defense. Sunday came heavy with rain. Thomas and I stayed indoors, reading the Chicago Tribune and sipping coffee. You think Marcus will ever see through her? Thomas asked. He's starting to, I said, but some people have to hit rock bottom before they can look up. That evening at around 9, another message arrived, from Marcus this time. Dad, please, I need to see you. I can't fix this over the phone. Just one meeting. I didn't answer right away, but as I stared at his messages, I realized avoidance wouldn't heal anything. He needed to see what he had done, not just feel it in his bank accounts. So I typed one short reply. Wednesday, 10 a.m. at Cafe Haven, downtown Chicago. He responded within seconds. Thank you, Dad. I'll be there. When Wednesday arrived, I dressed carefully. A navy suit, polished shoes, and the silver watch my late wife had given me on our 20th anniversary. I wanted to project calm authority, not anger. I reached Cafe Haven 15 minutes early and sat in a corner booth, facing the door. Marcus arrived exactly on time. The man who walked in barely resembled the confident son I once knew. His beard was unkempt, his eyes hollow, his posture defeated. He slid into the seat opposite me without saying a word. "I can't fix this," he began quietly. "The banks want the money now. Crystal's gone. She took her things and moved out. I don't even know where she is. And you," his voice broke, "you won't even speak to me." I looked at him evenly. "Marcus, you pushed me to the ground in front of 30 people. You humiliated me in the home I built for you. Tell me, why should I speak to you?" He lowered his gaze, voice trembling. "I was drunk. She told me you were trying to control me. She said everything I had was really yours, that you'd never see me as a man." "And you believed her?" He nodded slowly. "Because it was easier than facing the truth, that I'd never built anything on my own." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of every contract, loan, and transfer I had made over the last 8 years. "Read them," I said calmly. "Every cent, every signature. That's what I built for you. And that's what you threw away, chasing a woman who measured worth in jewelry and property." He turned each page with shaking hands. By the time he reached the last document, his eyes were wet. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You didn't want to know," I replied. "Ignorance is easier than gratitude." He wiped his face with a trembling hand. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'll fix this. I'll pay you back every dollar. I just need help with the banks. Just a few months." I stopped him. "No. You'll face this alone. I spent 40 years teaching you how to work, not how to beg." Marcus's shoulders slumped. "Then what do you want from me?" "I want you to earn your life," I said simply. "Not through apologies, but through actions. You'll find out what kind of man you are when there's nothing left to lean on." He didn't speak again for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was almost a whisper. "Can I at least see Aaliyah?" "You'll have to prove you're the father she deserves," I said. "She's seen more truth than most adults. Don't disappoint her again." He nodded silently, and for the first time in years, I saw humility instead of pride in his eyes. When I left the cafe, the autumn wind cut cold against my face, but something inside me felt clean, like I had washed away years of silent compromise. The next chapter of this story was about to begin, one where every lesson would cost Marcus dearly, but finally he would pay with his own hands. 2 days after our meeting, I returned to my apartment, feeling like a door had finally closed and another had opened, a door that led not to revenge, but to peace. Yet peace has a strange rhythm. It doesn't come in silence, but in the quiet after a storm when you realize what survived. On Friday morning, my phone rang again. It was Eric Patterson. "Andre," he said, his voice measured, "you should know that Crystal has hired an attorney. She's contesting the ownership of several assets. Claims the house was a marital gift from you to both of them." I let out a short, dry laugh. "She can contest anything she wants, Eric. The documents say otherwise." "They do," he agreed. "But she's playing for time. And more importantly, she's trying to provoke you. Don't respond directly to her, no matter what happens. Let me handle it." I thanked him and hung up. But even after the call, I couldn't shake the unease creeping back into my chest. I knew Crystal wasn't finished. People like her never leave quietly. They claw, they threaten, they invent. They believe that chaos is power. That afternoon, I took a long walk through Jackson Park, watching children play in the autumn leaves. I thought about Aaliyah, about the courage it took for her to stand up against her own mother, to expose the manipulation and greed behind those manicured smiles. I promised myself I'd protect her with every last breath in me. That night, my doorbell rang. It was Aaliyah. She'd come straight from school, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Dad's moving into Grandma's old apartment," she said quietly. He asked if I could stay with him this weekend, but she hesitated. I don't want to. You don't have to, sweetheart, I said gently. You can stay here. Your father needs time to rebuild himself. Right now, he's not ready to be anyone's shelter. She nodded and sat at the kitchen table while I warmed up dinner. Grandpa, she said softly after a while, do you hate him? I stopped, looking into her eyes, the same brown eyes that once belonged to my son before resentment darkened them. No, I said slowly. I don't hate him. I hate what he became, but people can change if pain teaches them what comfort never did. The next morning, we went out for breakfast at a small diner near Hyde Park Boulevard. While Aaliyah ate pancakes, I scanned the paper, but my attention drifted. I was thinking about how easily families fracture, not from great betrayals, but from little silences that pile up until love can't breathe. Later that afternoon, Eric called again. Andre, Crystal's attorney, has officially filed a notice to challenge the usufruct clause. She's claiming you added it after the purchase. That's ridiculous, I said, almost laughing. There's a notarized date and witness signatures. I know, Eric said calmly, but they're hoping to delay proceedings long enough to pressure Marcus into supporting her. Don't worry, it won't stand. I'm filing a counterclaim on Monday. I thanked him, then sat by the window, watching rain start to fall in soft streaks down the glass. It reminded me of the night my wife passed away. Quiet, relentless, and strangely cleansing. On Sunday morning, I received an unexpected visitor. Marcus showed up at my door wearing jeans, a worn jacket, and an expression of deep fatigue. Can we talk? He asked. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. Come in. He looked around the apartment, his gaze landing on a framed photograph of his mother. She'd hate what I've done, he said, almost to himself. Yes, I replied, but she'd also believe you can make it right. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. I sold my car, he said. A Mercedes, remember? Bought it because Crystal said every successful man needed one. I used the money to pay off part of the company's debt. I'm closing the consulting firm, too. I'm going back to work, real work, manual if I have to. I didn't speak for a moment. Pride swelled quietly inside me, not the arrogant kind, but the kind that feels like forgiveness stretching its wings. That's good, I said finally. Start small. Learn what it means to earn again. He looked at me, searching for something. Approval, maybe hope. Dad, he said softly, I don't deserve your forgiveness. You're right, I answered gently. Forgiveness isn't deserved. It's given, and it's earned back, day by day, through humility. We talked for 2 hours, about his mother, about mistakes, about how easily greed disguises itself as ambition. When he left, he hugged me. A real embrace, not the polite gestures of the past. I felt his shoulders tremble. It was the first honest moment between us in years. Aaliyah came out of her room after he left. Was that Dad? She asked. Yes. Did he apologize? He's starting to. She nodded thoughtfully. Maybe this time he'll mean it. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in over a decade. I wrote about legacy, not in terms of money or property, but of values, dignity, integrity, accountability. These were the only things that survived when everything else fell apart. Monday came gray and cold. Eric met me at the courthouse to file the counterclaim. Crystal didn't appear, but her lawyer did, a young man with slick hair and an expression that screamed arrogance. Eric demolished his arguments point by point, citing every notarized document, every timestamp, every witness. By noon, the judge dismissed her motion entirely. As we walked out, Eric smiled faintly. She's done. The house is legally untouchable, and Marcus can't lose it unless you authorize it. I thanked him again, this time with genuine relief. You've done more than protect my property, I said. You've protected what's left of my family. Over the next few weeks, things began to change quietly. Marcus took a job at a construction firm. Ironic, given how much of my life had been spent in that very business. Aaliyah continued staying with me during the school week, and little by little, laughter began to return to the apartment. She helped me cook, played jazz records on my old turntable, and filled the place with a life I thought I'd lost. One night, as we were cleaning the kitchen, she looked at me and smiled. "You know, Grandpa, I think we're going to be okay." And for the first time in what felt like years, I believed her. I went to bed that night feeling a strange peace. Maybe healing doesn't come from justice or punishment. It comes from rebuilding, one honest moment at a time. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't over. Because peace, fragile as glass, can always be tested again. And in this family, every lesson had come at a price. The winter that followed was the coldest Chicago had seen in years. Snow blanketed the streets of Hyde Park, muting the city's usual noise and covering the scars of old pavement like forgiveness hiding past sins. Inside my apartment, the radiators hissed and clanged, as though even they had something left to say. Aaliyah had turned 16 in January, and the small celebration we held, just the two of us, felt like the most peaceful evening in a decade. I made her favorite dish, fried chicken with mashed potatoes, and she surprised me with a chocolate cake she had baked herself. "I didn't want a party," she said, smiling shyly. "I just wanted family." Later that night, after she had gone to bed, I sat by the window watching snowflakes drift beneath the streetlight. There was something holy about the silence, but it didn't last. Peace, I've learned, is always brief when greed still lingers somewhere outside your door. 3 days later, Eric called again. "Andre, I just got word from one of my contacts at Wells Fargo. Crystal filed an informal complaint accusing you of elder financial manipulation." I closed my eyes and let out a long sigh. "She's still trying." "Yes," Eric said, "but it's weak. She's alleging that you used undue influence over Marcus's decisions years ago to maintain control over his finances. The irony, of course, is that every contract was designed to protect him, not control him." "Do we need to respond?" I asked. "Not yet," he said. "They'll review the claim, realize it's baseless, and dismiss it. But I want you to be prepared for something else. She's desperate, Andre. Desperate people don't stop until they hit a wall." He was right. The wall came 2 weeks later, but not for me, for her. Crystal tried to liquidate a joint investment account she had with Marcus, hoping to flee with the remaining funds. What she didn't know was that the bank had already frozen the assets pending legal resolution. Security footage later showed her storming out of the branch, screaming at the manager. The next day, Marcus called me. "Dad," he said quietly, "I think it's over. She's gone. She took her things and disappeared. Her lawyer quit. I don't even know where she is." "Let her go," I said. "You can't heal while you're still bleeding from her cuts." He was silent for a moment, then said, "I started therapy. I want to understand why I let all of this happen. For a long time, I had believed change in my son was impossible. But that moment, the humility in his voice, was proof that redemption sometimes wears the clothes of defeat." March arrived with the first signs of thaw. The snow melted from the rooftops, and puddles reflected a pale blue sky that hadn't been seen in months. Aaliyah began preparing for college applications, her dream to study psychology at Howard University in Washington, D.C. "I want to help people like Dad," she told me one evening, sitting cross-legged on the couch. "People who get lost but still have a chance to come back." I smiled, proud beyond words. "You'll make a great psychologist," I said. "You already understand more about the human heart than most adults I've met." In early April, I received an envelope in the mail addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a short letter from Marcus. "Dad, I've been sober for 90 days. I sold the last of my luxury watches and used the money to pay part of the debt. I'm working full-time at the construction company now. Every morning I wake up at 5 and remember the sound of you falling that night. I will never forgive myself for that, but I'm learning to forgive the man I used to be. Thank you for not turning your back on me completely. You saved me, even when I thought you were destroying me. Marcus." I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the same drawer where I kept his old report cards and photos from his childhood. For the first time in years, I felt my heart loosen its grip on anger. By summer, Marcus had moved into a small apartment on South Shore Drive near the lake. He invited Aaliyah and me for dinner one Friday evening. The apartment was modest, bare walls, simple furniture, but clean and full of sunlight. He had cooked pasta himself. "I didn't want to order out," he said. "I wanted to show I can take care of things." The dinner was awkward at first, but slowly conversation began to flow. We talked about the old hardware store, about my wife, about Aaliyah's plans for college. There were pauses, of course, small silences filled with memories neither of us could erase. But underneath them was something steady, a rebuilding of trust, brick by brick. After dinner, Marcus stood by the window looking out over Lake Michigan. "You know, Dad," he said quietly, "I used to think success meant never needing anyone. But I've learned that real strength is being grateful for the people who still stand beside you when you've fallen." I put a hand on his shoulder. "You had to lose everything to understand what you already had." He nodded. "I think Mom would be proud of us." I didn't answer because I knew if I spoke, my voice would break. That night, as Aaliyah and I drove home, she turned to me and said, "You did it, Grandpa. You fixed him." I smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart. Life did. Pain did. I just didn't let him run from it." The following months passed quietly. Crystal never resurfaced. The authorities eventually dismissed her complaint as unfounded. Marcus continued working, saving money, and rebuilding his reputation. Aaliyah received her acceptance letter from Howard University that fall, and when we celebrated, Marcus was there, sober, humble, and present. As I watched them laugh together, I realized that the house, the money, the business, none of it had ever been my true legacy. My real inheritance to them was strength, the kind that survives humiliation, the kind that knows forgiveness isn't weakness, but wisdom. One evening I sat alone on my balcony, watching the sunset bleed gold over the city skyline. I thought about all the things I had lost, my wife, my peace, my illusions, and all the things I had gained in return. Sometimes I realized the universe doesn't punish you by taking away what you love. It saves you by removing what blinds you. That night, I wrote one last note in my journal. The measure of a man is not in what he leaves behind, but in who learns from his scars. When I closed the notebook, the world outside was quiet again, but this time the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. By the time autumn returned, Chicago felt softer, somehow. The wind still cut sharp through the streets, but I'd learned to hear something else beneath its noise, a rhythm of resilience. Every morning I'd walk to the same corner cafe near Hyde Park, order black coffee, and read the paper in peace. No business meetings, no phone calls from banks, no lawyers, just quiet. Marcus called every Sunday now. The conversations were short, steady, and sincere. "Work's good," he'd say. "Aaliyah's excited about D.C." There was no tension anymore, only the tentative warmth of two men slowly remembering how to be father and son again. One crisp morning in late October, as yellow leaves blew across the street, I received a letter from Eric Patterson. Inside was a short note written in his careful hand. "Andre, I've officially closed your last active file. Your estate, assets, and rights are all fully protected. Enjoy your peace. You've earned it." Eric, I smiled when I read it. Peace, yes, a rare kind, the kind that comes only after everything collapses, and you realize you can live without the ruins. That afternoon I went through old boxes stored in my study. Records, photos, receipts, reminders of a life built on work and sacrifice. At the bottom of one box was a small envelope addressed in my late wife's handwriting. I hadn't seen it in years. Inside was a card dated 98, written in faded ink. "Andre, promise me that when life tests our family, you'll be the one who holds it together, even when it hurts. Grace." I read the words 3 times, then whispered, I kept my promise, Grace. That night, as I watched the city lights shimmer across the lake, I realized something simple but profound. Survival isn't about winning, it's about staying kind, even when the world teaches you bitterness. 2 weeks later, Marcus invited me to his first company event since rebuilding his career. He joined a new construction firm as a project supervisor and wanted me there for the ribbon cutting of a restored community center on the south side. I hesitated at first, but curiosity and pride won. When I arrived, I was greeted by the sound of laughter and the smell of fresh paint. Marcus was wearing a yellow hard hat and a reflective vest, smiling as he gave directions to his crew. For a moment, I didn't see the broken son who had betrayed me. I saw the boy he used to be, the one who helped me hammer boards at the old shop, the one who dreamed of building something lasting. When he noticed me, he froze. Then he walked over and shook my hand firmly. "I'm glad you came, Dad." "I wouldn't miss it," I said, my voice steady. He led me through the site, explaining the layout, the challenges, the deadlines. His tone was professional, confident. "We're turning this old building into a youth center," he said. "Kids need a place to go after school, somewhere safe." I looked around at the skeleton of steel beams and concrete, imagining what it would become. "You're building more than a center, Marcus. You're rebuilding yourself." He smiled faintly. "Maybe both." That night after the event, we sat in his truck watching the city lights. "You ever think about Mom?" he asked quietly. "Every day," I said, "but I think she'd be proud of you now." He nodded, staring out the windshield. "I hope so. Sometimes I still hear her voice when I mess up. It's like she's reminding me that there's a right way to live, even when it's hard." "Hold on to that voice," I said. "It'll save you when pride tries to speak louder." A few weeks later, Aaliyah called from Washington. "Grandpa, guess what? I got a scholarship," she shouted, barely letting me respond. "I'm going to work with a professor studying trauma recovery. I think I want to write my thesis about forgiveness." I laughed softly. "Then you'll have a lifetime of research just from our family." She giggled. "Maybe I'll dedicate it to you." When we hung up, I sat for a long time in silence, the phone still in my hand. It struck me how strange and beautiful redemption is, how it can start with violence and end in healing generations. But life has a way of testing peace. In early December, I received another unexpected visitor. Thomas Harris, my oldest friend, came by looking pale. "Doctor says it's my heart," he admitted quietly. "They're talking surgery." I put a hand on his shoulder. "You'll get through it. I'll be there every step." He smiled weakly. "You always are, Andre. Always cleaning up after broken men." After he left, I sat in the same chair where I'd once planned my legal revenge. Only this time I wasn't thinking about punishment or justice. I was thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind when time finally calls our name. Marcus visited that weekend to check on me. He helped around the house, changed a flickering bulb, fixed a leaky faucet. "It's the least I can do," he said. "After all the years you fixed everything for me." I didn't correct him. Some debts aren't paid with money, they're paid with presence. That Christmas, for the first time since my wife's death, we celebrated as a family. Marcus, Aaliyah, and I cooked dinner together. There were no extravagant gifts, no champagne, no guests, just us. Aaliyah decorated the tree while Jazz played softly from my old turntable. When dinner was ready, Marcus raised his glass. "To second chances," he said, "and to the man who never gave up on me." I raised mine. "To learning the hard way, because that's the only way we ever really learn." We ate, laughed, and for a moment time felt suspended. The house was full again, not of noise or luxury, but of peace. Later that night, after they'd gone home, I stood by the window one last time, looking out over the quiet city. Snow was falling again, soft and slow. I thought about every step that had led here, the betrayal, the pain, the reckoning, the forgiveness, and I realized something I had never truly understood before. Love, when it's real, isn't about never breaking. It's about always being willing to rebuild, I turned off the lights, walked to my bedroom, and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, not for wealth, not for victory, but for the strength to endure and still love after everything. January came with its gray skies and long frozen mornings. The streets of Hyde Park were lined with salt and slush, the trees bare, their branches clawing at the sky like tired hands. Life had settled into a rhythm again, simple, predictable, and quietly fulfilling. Every morning I'd make coffee, read the newspaper, then walk 2 blocks to check on Thomas Harris, who was recovering from his heart surgery. He looked weaker than before, but his humor hadn't left him. "You see," he joked one morning, adjusting his blanket, "the good Lord's not done punishing you yet, Andre. He kept me alive so I can still bother you." I laughed softly and brought him his favorite muffins. "I've carried worse burdens," I replied. Those small exchanges became our daily ritual, a reminder that friendship, much like forgiveness, doesn't fade. It just grows quieter with time. Marcus visited often now. He had regained color in his face and weight in his words. Each visit came with stories about his job, the crew, and the satisfaction of honest labor. "Dad," he said one evening as we sat on the balcony watching the lake, "I don't think I've ever been this tired. And I've never slept this well either." "That's the kind of exhaustion that builds men," I said, "not the kind that destroys them." He smiled faintly. "You were right, you know. I didn't understand gratitude until I lost everything." "You didn't lose everything," I said quietly. "You still have what matters." A week later, Aaliyah came home from Howard University for winter break. She'd grown more confident, her speech full of purpose and clarity. "Grandpa," she said the night she arrived, "I've been writing something for one of my classes, a paper on generational healing. It's about us." "About us?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She nodded, smiling. "It's about how forgiveness doesn't start with saying sorry. It starts when someone decides the story will end differently than it began." Her words hit me deeper than she realized. "You always did have your grandmother's wisdom," I said. We spent the next few days decorating the apartment, cooking meals, and visiting Marcus at his new job site. He'd been promoted to project manager, overseeing the completion of the youth center. When we arrived, he proudly showed us the final touches: freshly painted walls, new computers, and a mural of bright colors that read, "Build, believe, begin again." "It was Aaliyah's idea," Marcus said, smiling. "She helped design it." I looked at both of them and felt something settle in my chest, a quiet pride that words couldn't hold. For years I had believed legacy was something you built in brick and steel. Now I knew it was something you shaped in people. But life, as always, had one more test waiting. In February I received an anonymous letter in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief message written in blue ink. "You think it's over. It's not." See, I froze. For a moment the past returned like a cold hand around my throat. "Crystal." I immediately called Eric Patterson. "She's back," I said, reading him the note. He sighed deeply. "Andre, don't panic. This is likely an attempt to intimidate you. She's legally cornered. She can't touch your assets, your property, or your family. But I'll have the police notified just in case." That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories came flooding back. The laughter at that cursed birthday party, the humiliation, the silence of the guests. But now, I wasn't the same man. Fear had no home left in me. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and then deliberately, I sat down at my desk and began to write a letter, not to Crystal, but to myself. "Andre, you've faced worse storms. You know now that peace is not the absence of trouble, but the strength to walk through it. If she returns, face her without anger. You have nothing left to lose and everything already regained." The following week, Eric called again. Police traced the note to a post office box in Milwaukee. "It's been abandoned. We believe she's gone for good." Gone. 2 syllables that carried the weight of closure. That evening I met Marcus for dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. He ordered coffee instead of wine, and I noticed his hands didn't shake anymore. "Dad," he said suddenly, "I want to ask something. I know you own the Naperville house still, legally. I don't deserve to live there, but I'd like to turn it into something else." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then continued. "A transitional home for men trying to rebuild after prison or addiction. I've seen so many guys on the job site with nowhere to go after they get clean. They just need a chance, someone to believe in them." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. This wasn't the voice of the arrogant man who once shoved his father in front of guests. This was a man reborn through labor, pain, and truth. "Do it," I said finally. "I'll sign whatever papers you need. Let that house become what it never was, a place of healing." He smiled, and in his eyes I saw the faint glimmer of the boy I used to lift onto my shoulders decades ago. 2 months later, the renovations began. Marcus handled everything: permits, funding, donations. Aaliyah helped organize a small nonprofit to manage the program. They named it Grace House, after my late wife. When I saw the sign for the first time, freshly painted and shining under the afternoon sun, my throat tightened. During the grand opening, Marcus gave a short speech. "My father built homes," he said to the small crowd gathered outside. "But more than that, he taught me how to rebuild myself. This place is dedicated to him, and to every man who's ever had to start over." When he finished, he turned toward me and raised his hand. The crowd applauded. I didn't cry, but deep inside something sacred moved. That night, Aaliyah asked me how it felt. I thought for a moment and said, "It feels like my mistakes finally learned their purpose." She smiled. "Grandpa, I think this is what healing looks like." I nodded. "Yes, it doesn't erase the pain. It redeems it." Later, as we drove back through the quiet streets of Naperville, I glanced at the glowing sign one last time. Grace House, a home born from betrayal, turned into redemption. When I got back to my apartment, I wrote one final note in my journal. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's remembering without letting it poison you. Love doesn't end when it breaks. It begins again when you decide to rebuild. And for the first time in my long life, I knew I had truly rebuilt everything that mattered. Spring returned to Chicago with the kind of cautious warmth that makes you question if winter is really gone. Tulips began pushing through the dirt outside my building, and the city air carried that faint smell of thawing pavement and new beginnings. Grace House had been open for 6 months now, and already the first residents were moving in, men who'd come out of shelters, halfway homes, and rehab centers. Marcus ran it with quiet authority, never raising his voice, always leading by example. Every Sunday after church, I'd drive to Naperville to visit. The old house that had once been the scene of my deepest humiliation was now alive with laughter and purpose. There were bunk beds in the rooms, donated furniture, and a small library Aaliyah had organized herself. In the backyard, where the pool used to glitter under expensive lights, Marcus had planted a vegetable garden. "These men need to see growth," he said one day as we walked past rows of tomatoes and peppers, "something that depends on them to survive." I looked around and felt something stir in my chest, a mix of pride and peace that no amount of money could ever buy. "You're doing good work," I said. He smiled. "I'm just trying to make things right, Dad." "No," I said softly. "You're making things better." That afternoon, we sat with the residents in the living room as Marcus shared his story. He spoke about failure, addiction to comfort, and the arrogance that comes from thinking you'll never need forgiveness. The men listened quietly, nodding. When he finished, one of them, a tall man named Jerome, stood up and said, "You talking about yourself saved me, man. I thought I was the only one who lost everything and still woke up breathing." Marcus shook his hand. "We're all rebuilding something," he said, "and this house is proof we can." Later, as the sun set over the neighborhood, I stood alone in the doorway for a moment. The laughter from inside floated out through the open windows. The same house where I'd once been shoved to the floor now echoed with voices of gratitude and renewal. Life has a way of rewriting its own stories, if you let it. A week later, I received a call from Eric Patterson. "Andre, I've got good news," he said. "The foundation paperwork for Grace House came through. It's officially recognized as a nonprofit. Your name is listed as co-founder." I chuckled. "I didn't do anything." He laughed back. "That's not what Marcus says. He said none of this would exist without you." That night, I couldn't help but open my old journal again. I flipped through the pages, all the entries written through pain, anger, and hard lessons. On the last page, I wrote only one sentence. "Sometimes the hardest walls to rebuild are the ones inside your own heart." Summer came early that year. Aaliyah finished her first year at Howard with top grades. She came home full of stories, energy, and plans for Grace House. "I want to organize workshops," she said excitedly one evening, "teaching financial literacy, emotional health, communication, real life stuff." Marcus smiled from across the table. "You're just like Grandpa, always turning ideas into plans." She laughed. "Then maybe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." One weekend in June, we hosted the first Grace House community event. Neighbors, volunteers, and donors filled the yard. There was food, music, and speeches. I sat in a folding chair under the shade of an oak tree, watching people come together around something that had once been born from despair. Marcus stood at the microphone, his voice clear and strong. "I used to think this house was cursed," he said. "I thought it was where I lost everything. But I was wrong. This house was never the end. It was the beginning. My father taught me that even after the worst betrayal, love can still build something new. This place stands because of him, because he refused to stop believing that family can heal." The crowd applauded, and I found myself fighting back tears. Thomas, who was sitting beside me with a cane, leaned over and whispered, "He's his mother's son after all." That night, when the event ended and the last guests had left, Marcus and I stood alone in the quiet yard. The string lights swayed gently above us. "Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "there's something I've been meaning to give you." He handed me a small, leather-bound book. "It's the journal I've been keeping since the night you walked out of the party. I started it because I needed somewhere to face the truth." I opened it and saw the first entry dated October 21st, 2024, the night of my humiliation. The first words read, "I pushed my father tonight. I've never hated myself more." The entries that followed charted his journey through guilt, loss, therapy, rebuilding. It was the story of a man who had finally met himself. When I closed the book, I looked at him and said, "This is your redemption, son." He smiled faintly. "No, Dad, you're my redemption." We hugged then, not the stiff, uneasy embrace of the past, but a real one, the kind that says everything words can't. As the months passed, Grace House grew. Donations came in, new residents arrived, and Aaliyah's workshops became a success. One evening, she stood before a small group of men teaching about emotional intelligence, her voice firm and bright. I watched from the back of the room, overwhelmed with gratitude. 3 generations, all scarred in their own way, had somehow turned pain into purpose. When the session ended, Marcus joined me at the door. "She's incredible," he said quietly. "She's your daughter," I replied. He smiled, nodding. "And your legacy." That night I returned home and sat on my balcony under the stars. The city hummed below, alive and endless. I thought about the boy I'd raised, the mistakes I'd made, the forgiveness I'd learned to give. Peace, I realized, isn't something you wait for. It's something you choose, again and again, no matter how many times life breaks you. As I closed my eyes, I whispered a quiet prayer, not of request, but of thanks, for storms that had passed, for love that had survived, and for the grace that had turned pain into light. By the time autumn returned again, 1 full year had passed since that night in Naperville. The air carried the same chill, but everything else was different. The house that had once echoed with greed and arrogance now stood as a beacon of second chances. The same marble floors that had once met my fall were now worn by the steps of of men rebuilding their dignity. Every weekend I drove there, not as a guardian, but as a witness. Marcus had become a leader in ways I could never have predicted. He no longer measured success in numbers or possessions, but in people. One afternoon, while we sat on the porch watching residents unload supplies, he turned to me and said, "Dad, I used to think you built an empire out of concrete and steel, but you built something stronger. Discipline. I just didn't see it before." I smiled. The kind that comes from deep knowing. "Discipline isn't about control," I said. "It's about care. You care enough to protect what matters, even when others call it harsh." He nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "I understand that now. Every rule you set was a lesson I was too proud to learn." Inside, Aaliyah was leading a session with new residents. Her voice carried through the halls, calm and steady, guiding them through conversations about fear, forgiveness, and self-worth. Watching her made me realize that my family's story had become something greater than us. It was now a blueprint for healing. Later that evening, when the residents gathered for dinner, Marcus asked me to speak. I hesitated. I'd spent my whole life working, building, and fixing, but speaking from the heart had never been my trade. Still, I stood. "I once believed love meant giving everything," I began. "Money, houses, opportunity. I was wrong. Real love isn't about giving. It's about teaching someone how to earn. You can hand a man the world, but if he doesn't know its worth, he'll destroy it. My son taught me that truth the hard way, and I thank him for it." The room was silent. Some of the men bowed their heads. Others stared at me with quiet respect. "If you take one thing from my story," I continued, "let it be this. Forgiveness doesn't erase what was done. It allows you to stop being the prisoner of it." When I sat down, Marcus's eyes were shining. "Thank you," he whispered. That night, after the gathering, he walked me to my car. "You know, Dad," he said softly, "I used to think the worst night of my life was the one where I pushed you. But now I see it was the best. It forced me to face myself." I looked at him carefully. "The night you broke me," I said, "was the night that built both of us." We didn't need more words. Sometimes silence between two men says more than speeches ever could. Months rolled on. Grace House expanded to a second property, a small complex in South Chicago donated by a local church. Aaliyah managed its operations during her summer breaks, bringing in counselors and social workers. Her dedication reminded me of her grandmother, of the way Grace had once said, "We don't heal by running from pain, Andre. We heal by walking through it." One evening in November, I received a call from Marcus. His voice was trembling slightly. "Dad, Thomas passed away this morning." I closed my eyes. The world fell quiet for a moment. "Was he in pain?" I asked. "No," Marcus said softly. "He went in his sleep." I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat in my chair for a long while, the city lights blurring through my tears. Thomas had been my mirror, my reminder that life, no matter how long, is always shorter than we think. At his funeral, Marcus spoke a few words. "Thomas taught my father loyalty," he said, "and my father taught me endurance. Between them I learned what real manhood looks like." After the ceremony, I walked alone through the cemetery paths, the crunch of dry leaves beneath my shoes. The sun was setting behind the skyline, casting the stones in gold and shadow. I whispered, "Rest easy, my friend. We kept the promise." When winter returned, so did the quiet rhythm of days. My health began to falter, a slower gait, shorter breaths, but I faced it without fear. Each morning I'd receive a call from Aaliyah, her bright voice filling the apartment with warmth. "Grandpa, we're publishing a book about Grace House," she'd say. "It's going to tell everyone how it all started. With you." I'd laugh. "Then you'd better write it well," I'd tease. "I want to sound wiser than I actually was." One snowy afternoon, Marcus came by with a small envelope. "Dad," he said, placing it on the table, "it's official. We've renamed the foundation." I opened the paper slowly. Inside was a certificate. The Andre Miller Foundation for Renewal. My throat tightened. You didn't have to do this, I murmured. He smiled. I did. Because everything we are, Grace House, this family, the men rebuilding their lives, it all started the night you refused to give up on me. I stood and hugged him. This time I was the one trembling. Promise me one thing, I said. Keep it honest. Keep it kind. Don't let success make you forget the ground it grew from. I promise, he said. In the spring of the following year, Grace House celebrated its second anniversary. Hundreds attended. The residents, their families, donors, even city officials. Aaliyah gave a speech that left everyone silent. My grandfather taught us that forgiveness is strength, she said, standing under the banner with my name on it. He taught us that rebuilding isn't just about bricks or walls. It's about people finding their worth again. And every man who walks through these doors is proof that love, even when broken, can still build something unbreakable. As the applause rose, Marcus looked at me, and I felt something shift inside. A completion. A circle closed. That night, when I returned home, I sat by the window one last time, the city glowing beneath a soft rain. My breathing was slower now, but steady. I opened my old journal, turned to the final page, and wrote, Legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about who learns to love again because you refuse to stop. I closed the book, placed it on my desk, and whispered a prayer of gratitude for Grace, for Tahamas, for Marcus, for Aaliyah, and even, in some quiet way, for Crystal, whose cruelty had unknowingly birthed redemption. Outside, thunder rolled over Lake Michigan, and I smiled. Not in sadness, but in peace. Because finally, after a lifetime of storms, the house was whole again.